You're listening to Cloud9, where BahaiTeachings.org interviews artists from around the globe to learn about what inspires, uplifts, and motivates them to make a positive contribution to the world. My name is toloui-wallace. In this episode of Cloud9, BahaiTeachings.org interviews multidisciplinary artist Ruha Fifita. Born and raised on the Pacific island of Tonga, Ruha was introduced at an early age to the ancient indigenous art form and cultural practice of Ngatu making through family and elders. Ngatu, the Tongan form of the indigenous South Pacific Islander art form, best known as tapa, has deep spiritual meaning for Tongans. A chance collaboration with renowned New Zealand artist Robin White led to an exploration of community engagement, reciprocity, environmental conservation, and oneness through the making of many large-scale Ngatu pieces. Today, Ruha's work is exhibited in galleries and festivals across Australasia and the Pacific. Her art continues to explore the fundamental role that Ngatu plays in community life, how it has become a symbol for racial and tribal unification, and the preservation of culture and history. Hi, Ruha. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
I know you're in Australia, but where exactly in Australia are you?
I'm in Queensland, in a suburb called Goodna, a little bit southwest of the main city, Brisbane.
For our listeners out there, I actually grew up in Brisbane, and so my accent, which is very Canadian now, might fluctuate from time to time. Where I will probably adopt an Australian accent because I'm talking to a fellow Australian and Brisbaneite. So I apologize if it's hard to keep up. It's very difficult for me to listen to.
As well.
So I know you're from Tonga originally, but how did you end up in Goodna?
I guess I moved to Australia to study. It was kind of a spontaneous decision to come and study creative industries here. And following that, actually during that time, I was encouraged to become involved in some of the community building efforts of the Baha'i community here. And so since then, I've been in Goodna, I think, since the first year that I moved here and have just stayed ever since. So it's just, I finished uni and continued to be involved, and it's just something that's held me to this place.
And the community, I think, has also become quite the family for you as well in Goodna.
Yeah, definitely. It's amazing. It's so diverse. The first house that we moved into here was in a complex, and there were no two homes where people were from the same country. So we had, one house from Brazil and Congo and Sudan and Fiji, and it was just so nice to feel that people from all of those different countries could come to feel like family, when you interacted in a certain way and you were looking for ways to just support each other and work together to create positive environments for the children and learn together. So it's amazing to see that process unfold.
So beautiful. So what was your life like in Tonga, and how does it differ to where you live now?
Growing up in Tonga was very different. I think, it's still a very kind of village-oriented place, and often where you live, the people around you know you and your family and very well, and there's a very kind of warm feeling of you're always sharing food with your neighbors, and whenever you go to town, you've got to kind of give an hour's extra time because you're going to be running into people all day. It's not just to go and get the errands done. To be running in and catching up with family and friends. And it was really, I think, exciting to live there and be part of a culture that was so vibrant and happening. I think our parents made the decision for us to grow up there so we could be part of learning the language and be involved with all of our extended family, which I think was such a beautiful dynamic to have. Here it's often, like extended families are very spread out. So there you're kind of so many cousins and uncles and aunties, and there's just a lot of like intergenerational interaction and a lot of differences, I think. But
interesting. So I know you grew up in a really creative household and community. Could you share a bit about what paved the way for your own creative journey?
My mom's actually from New Zealand. She's European Welsh, and she was a musician. And so my dad came from this family this Tongan family, and all through our life, we were encouraged to learn musical instruments, to always be performing at family functions and dancing. And we'd have our aunties, making the costumes. And then when we were old enough, we would be helping making costumes.
So in previous conversations with you, you'd mentioned your grandmother as a major influencer on your own creative practice. Could you share about what she was working on and how and what kind of knowledge she shared and passed on to you?
My grandma used to make a lot of ngatu, which is the bark cloth that we use in Tonga for a lot of different things, but predominantly now for ceremonial purposes. And it's painted with natural pigments, and they make them quite large. So she was involved in that, and a lot of weaving and crocheting, and I guess making dance costumes was a big part of it. The different art forms are so interconnected. So you have, a lot of weaving and working with this bark cloth. The purpose is to make dance costumes or to create things for ceremony. And then the songs and dances are really to bring to life poetry that has been written. And so they have this kind of connection that's completely integral. You dance in something that has been designed specially for the poem and from the village that you're from. And the movements as well relate to those words and to the designs on your costume. So
this sounds like a very holistic approach. How did you transform these traditional practices that you were learning through your family and the elders into contributing to the service in your community?
We got into doing dancing with a Baha'i dance group that was would tour Tonga, and we decided to do dances that were kind of exploring different themes, very different from traditional ones. So like the impacts of drugs and alcohol and the oneness of religion and those kinds of things. And so with that, we needed to fundraise at one point. And so the whole dance group got into making ngatu, so painting ngatu. And from there we found, okay, this is something that not just for making costumes and different things, but we were making now like wall hangings and prayer book covers. And our family just, once that started, the group kept getting orders. And once the group kind of stopped their project and tours were over, we just kept painting together. And so that was from the age of about 8. And it was something we just did together for hours and hours of the week and the day. And we just loved it, listening to the radio and painting. And our mom learned how to paste the tapa together and prepare everything. And we found people that we knew well that made really beautiful materials.
So could you elaborate a bit about the process of making ngatu? Because I know it's a very prayerful practice. It's a practice that's mostly done and performed by women. Could you elaborate more on this for our listeners?
When you make a piece of ngatu, the men, they're part of kind of cultivating the trees and chopping them down and helping to prepare, strip the bark and all those things. And then once the materials are prepared, it's handed over to the women. And these pieces of ngatu sometimes go for, they're 80 feet long. So what's that, like 30 or so meters plus, the kind of standard size. And it really is the way that they create this and is that women will come together. And now I'm not sure what it was like in the past, but now, it's regularly coming together and you kind of get your name on a list and you get your name on a list, and every week or however regularly you meet with the group of women in your village, you bring a contribution of ngatu the bark that you've beaten and prepared yourself. And every week you make a huge one by joining all of the pieces of these different families together, and you make a ngatu for the first person on the list. Then the next week or the next time you come together, you'll all contribute and you'll paste together one for the next person on the list. And so it's this kind of very collective aspect. And then once it's been pasted, you're all part of painting it. So you must there's this, you need a framework so that everyone is painting and it's kind of a uniform thing. So they have these relief patterns that are created that have the basic design. And it's kind of rubbed up onto kind of like a coin rubbing. So in the process of joining all the tapa, the design underneath, which is on a relief pad, is rubbed up onto the top. And then that is just repeated as the whole thing's joined together gradually. You just kind of get this blueprint of the design across the whole length of the tapa. And that's used, so each woman will come and paint, but they'll add their little, they have a different way of interpreting the design often. But when you come away from it, it's really about creating one thing together, and something that's so much more than anything you could create on your own.
So it sounds a lot like there's this element of having a collective experience through having a unity of vision and also consultation.
Yeah, the collective experience. And it's about, the conversations that happen. It's really process-oriented. It's, once it's finished, it's cut up into many different things, and it's not this precious item. But it really, the time that those women spend together, and that's where they share stories and support each other in their family challenges. And there's no men around. It's really a unique space to explore things that are specifically relevant to their own experience. And I think that's a really important aspect of the culture there, is that we have these spaces for different support.
So how would you say this practice differs to that in the West?
Indigenous art, as I see different perhaps from Western society, is just the emphasis it has on a collective experience, and one that's about the prosperity of a community so directly. And maybe another point, and I think is so beautiful and has been something that's really inspired me to engage with all parts of the process, is just the connection you develop with the environment and the world around you. This is, I kind of used to just paint and buy the materials from other people that were making, which you can do a lot now. But just in starting to learn about all of these materials come from nature, and they've kind of grown together, and the history of, just such a long history of people figuring out different ways of making pigments and different plants to use, and the way that things work together and how you prepare them. They come together in a way that you can't, there's just like, you have a piece of tapa, and there's no better medium to use on that tapa than these dyes. Paint, watercolors, just none of it works the same. It's just amazing to see that balance has evolved. And then when you're working with them, the level of awe and respect you develop for the environment, I think, is also a really important relationship for Indigenous cultures, and often comes out in their customary and creative practices. And so I think in my own experience of doing that, it teaches you like incredible patience and love for nature, and just prayerfulness and reverence. It really challenges you on those fronts and helps you to develop those qualities. And I think,
like, it refocuses the value.
Developing those qualities of those spiritual qualities is really the value of art. And I think anything that we do in terms of just Indigenous arts, when those processes are honored for their significance of being able to cultivate and nurture the spiritual qualities that are so essential to our own development and to the development of our communities, I think that's something really unique. And the purpose was really often to praise the qualities of others. So it was made to honor your leaders and their qualities, or made in honor of the gods.
So fast forward to what you're doing today. Could you share a little bit more about some of the projects that you're working on, some of the ideas that you're exploring at the moment?
Yeah.
You'd also mentioned to me a recent collaboration with an amazing New Zealand artist, Robin White.
Art is something or painting and being involved in painting Ngatu and dancing and singing. It is something that I hope to be involved with the rest of my life. And there's experiences now with community building and different things that have kind of, in terms of the aspirations to maybe have it something that I do for more of my time during the year, or more of my time during a week. I see that at the moment I'm kind of engaged in things that are helping me to really learn that research aspect of creating, where you're kind of like, what is it that I want to say as an artist? What's important? And the collaboration that I did with Robin, it taught me so many things. And one of the things that she would always emphasize is that the role of an artist is to find something to say, and then decide on the best way to say it. And I think what's driven my own is that I've, in just being involved in the community and in these different projects with working with Ngatu, is that I've discovered that it really is just the best way to say some things that perhaps we should all be talking about. And one of, I guess, two things that stand out to me and have guided my own research around this practice is the oneness of humanity.
Cool. So what have been your findings?
You know that all of humanity is part of one family. If we look back, the movement of peoples, even maybe more specifically at that at the Pacific, you know, knowing that we all came from such similar origins and are connected and, you know, spread out across this vast ocean. And then as a result of being in different environments and developing different tools, our language became different because we needed different words to describe those different processes. And then, you know, being able to use, and then from there, it kind of diversified what we did and how we prepared food, how we interacted, how we honored the gods. All of those how we did things were different, but at the core of it, you know, we're all one family. And so there's one aspect where even in looking at how Ngatu has traveled and is connected all over the Pacific, you see that it's really something that was at a time where perhaps we understood that a bit better. So I look at, you know, I've traveled to Fiji a couple of times, and you see there's groups of islands that are between Fiji and Tonga. And they, although now in Fiji, what they make commercially is quite different in a lot of senses from what's in Tonga. It's amazing that we're using the same materials, first of all, but that actually on some islands, what they're doing is very much the same, and their language for it is the same.
So how does your research and your knowledge and understanding of these various racial groupings play a part in the vision of unity in your work?
Actually in Tonga, Fijians experience a lot of prejudice, and there's a bit of racism, and it's often, you know, mocking to call someone a Fijian or say someone's hair is like a Fijian, or these kinds of terms. And, you know, if we look back far enough, we just lift our consciousness to this, you know, if we really appreciate that humanity is one family, and try to reflect evidence of that is the way that it was, and we've kind of lost sight of it, I think, it can really help us to overcome these prejudices that exist in the world. So I've done, one of the projects that I've been involved in is really exploring with Fijian artists and trying to create works that reflect the shared skill and the shared knowledge and history that we have, to emphasize that oneness, you know, and just kind of bringing it down into a focus. But that exists everywhere. Even in New Caledonia, you just meet with people and suddenly you have things that you thought were so Tongan or so yours. People share and they have the same, and they do it sometimes even better, or they do it in a different way, or they've found different things. And it just makes it so exciting to think what would be possible if we, you know, if we kind of lifted those imagined boundaries that hold us to kind of thinking things are a competition or separating ourselves from others, or, you know, that I think are, they're just imagined, really.
So I know that you've worked with the renowned artist from New Zealand, Robin White. Could you share a bit about that collaboration and the experience of working with her and some of the takeaways and insights and learnings that you gained from that experience that you're able to apply to your own artwork?
Yeah. Oh gosh, so much. We started collaborating when I think I must have been, just turned 21. She was, that was now some years ago, like over 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And it was something that emerged so organically. She'd come to us to Tonga. She actually had worked with Fijian artists before that, and had fallen in love with the practice. She's a printmaker by trade, so that way of just working with images and simple, color schemes, color palettes, and printing quite bold images that are symbolic. You know, this use of like developing visual vocabulary that you can repeatedly use. So that was kind of in her practice already, and so I guess it drew her to the work of Ngatu making. and use of pattern and different things. So anyway, she really wanted, after being in Fiji, she really wanted to learn about Tongan Ngatu. She's like, this is where it started. And at the time I was living in Tonga and was part of an NGO, so an arts NGO that just, we were a group of friends that loved doing creative things. And so we looked for ways that we could serve the community through art and through teaching art and creating it with others. So she came and I helped to organize the reception for these artists, and we got talking, and we were looking for someone, I feel like she needed someone that was an expert in, the practice and all elements. And at that time my only experience was really just buying the materials and painting wall hangings and my own.
And being with your family.
Yeah, and doing it with my family. And yeah, exactly. So she got there and she was kind of like, can you help me find like some elder that I can work with? And so we went around it, but we just got talking so much in the process. And
you became the elder.
Yeah, I became the elder. I kind of became. Yeah, I got really old. I think just over that week. No, it wasn't about that. I think just the connection, the ability to just talk out concepts and think about how they would be represented visually and how the message could be captured. And just, I had a real thirst to learn more about the practice as well, and just loved doing it. Like, I would choose to spend any amount of time sitting and painting. Like, that's something I would definitely choose to do over many things in life. And she was the same. And so I think those common threads of having kind of shared core beliefs and knowing that we both felt really committed to the message, and also saw that this was a really powerful way of conveying that message.
What was the message? So
the message was really, the first one that we did was really focusing on this reciprocity between, so we actually created artworks that were like, they were actually like boats that traveled, and in them were placed things that, things that came from Tonga and that had come and influenced New Zealand cultures and ways of being, from, the huge number of Tongans that now live in New Zealand. I think even more than live in Tonga. And then also from New Zealand, things that had been taken and shared. And a lot of our conversation was around how this would, how the impacts it had, enriching both places, and that this highway, it was this highway of wildlife as well as, nature. There's eels that travel all the way up that Kermadec Trench, and whales travel. That's their kind of guiding pathway as they travel from the Antarctic all the way to Tonga to give birth each year. The Kermadec is a small group of islands that's just north of New Zealand, so it's right smack bang in between New Zealand and Tonga. This just connection between how this has become, for people, has become such a well-traveled journey, and the significance of that on both sides. I guess was the first one. I had quite a strong focus on the impacts of that on the environment as well. So, in the process of doing that, we together learned a lot about how do you even plan or think about artworks of that scale? How do you work collaboratively with others? What's the importance of having a shared vision, and how do different relationships and the conversations really lend themselves to higher quality, more full works? Like, we just, in the process, you realize that relationships we had with people, the ability, the quality of, I guess, the way that people feel like they're learning and their love for the work really manifests itself in the end product. Like, you can just feel the difference, all those things. And so once you do one and you hit all these stumbling blocks and you kind of just get through, you just want to do it better and better, and you see all these opportunities. So, and all these different things that you could say. It's just like, wow, it's such a powerful medium. There's a lot of that knowledge that's being lost, I guess, is the case with a lot of these Pacific islands and art forms. So it's a matter of, trying to engage with it so that knowledge is there, and finding ways that they are, trying to reflect in our practice, ways that they're really relevant to things that need to be said and explored today.
So as a Baha'i who's also working in this medium, what are some What are some correlating factors or teachings and beliefs that you're able to apply as a Baha'i into your work and insights that you've gained from it?
Yeah, there's a number of them. I reflect on this a lot, actually. But maybe one is that this idea, it's building off of that oneness of humanity, but also what's, the vision that the Baha'i faith offers for this future, humanity's potential in this future civilization that we believe we're building, is that the uniqueness of each of these cultures is so important. It's not one that seeks to kind of that asks for indigenous religious beliefs and cultural practice to be given up. Instead, it's really so much of the Baha'i writings is about how do we bring this diversity and allow it to find new meaning in responding to the needs of the world for today. I guess one of the quotes that comes to mind is, and I don't know it off by heart, I was looking for it, but this idea that every population is kind of forging its path towards truth and ever greater truth. And I guess this vision of Baha'u'llah is what we believe as Baha'is to be that guiding light of truth in the world today. And so I guess when I engage with the artistic practice, it's always this it's this process of really finding those things and knowing that a lot of our cultural practice to give up and to shed, certain ways of thinking, cultural ways of thinking that perhaps, they've become warped or they don't, there are things that we should give up or sacrifice in our desire to progress, but there are also ones that are very important to keep, and that, this analogy of being the flowers of one garden, that each unique contribution is something that really enriches the world that we envision for the future. And
so how do you unify elements of peoples that have found such diverse ways of expressing themselves and communicate their values?
I think that's something that I've always been really interested in exploring, because I feel like there are just such important things about these practices that need to be kept in the world, and about these communities. I go back to the islands, and it's just, there are such beautiful things about that community culture that the world needs to can learn from. And I think that exists in every culture, but one that you have that intimate knowledge of, you're always so driven to kind of say, well, I was born in this part of the world, and I've been able to gain quite a deep appreciation for this way of seeing. So I want to learn about the contribution that it can make now and continue to make, and engage with it in a way that I'm also open to trying to understand where the world is at globally, and see its contribution from that context, not just how can these cultural things contribute to the well-being of my family, but really what does it have to offer the world. And I think that's a really exciting possibility now that perhaps wasn't always the case in the past. We have such amazing access to information, and to people, have generated such rich amounts of knowledge about the world and about societies and our own histories, that we have all of this to draw from. And I think it's always been an attitude of Indigenous people to just reach out and try and absorb all the knowledge that we can access, and then channel it and build on our own experience, and try to kind of weave it into something that we can use for the benefit of those that we love and care about, and for others, and helping to, I guess, advance these causes that and the work that's being done to I guess overcome these challenges and to move forward. That's something I really believe. So I think my own view and my own motivation for participating and working these art forms is to learn about that, learn about how it can continue to evolve and build on what's happening globally.
And how are you connecting it? We're talking at a global scale, but how are you also connecting it to your own neighborhood? Because I know you're incredibly involved in the community.
Yeah, I think it's this idea of in our neighborhood. I mean, the world is in this neighborhood, seriously. There's people from all over the place. But you learn. I found that it's such a powerful way, like even just on a personal level, like the way that I reflect and process information, drawing and thinking about how to like digest something into a visual summary or a visual image is part of how I learn and different things. And I find that that's like working with the arts is actually a way that a lot of people learn and can reflect on things more deeply in these spaces where we're learning together and studying together. It's this question of, how can we use art to be able to consolidate these ideas or to go deeper into the way that we understand them? And so I'm always drawing on my own experience, and I'm really excited to hear about other people's thoughts and just try things. Like it's given us this ground to really experiment with such a diversity of people, which is really exciting. So that's one element of it, is bringing it into, study spaces and meeting spaces.
So could you share an example?
So like one recently, my sister and we decided to involve a lot of this age group of 12 to 15-year-olds, so junior youth, in creating our own huge Ngatu here in our community. And so it was bringing together all these people from different culture, these young individuals from different cultures, and really just saying, you're not children anymore. They have a really important perspective of the world, and they also, have really important things to say and really noble aspirations. So it was bringing all of those things, voicing those in a space all together, and just seeing that although we're from such different places, there's so much that we share, even at this age group. And then, kind of going through that process of thinking about designs and where we come from, and seeing it really before our eyes start to be, that all these different designs and ideas that people contribute make this one beautiful artwork. And so we're in the process of finishing that. We've gone and visited groups of these junior youth that kind of come together regularly in their own neighborhoods as junior youth groups. We've gone and visited a number of those in different areas around Southeast Brisbane, and work with them to create designs and have conversations exploring, with each other, the importance of unity and diversity and different things. So they've created the designs, and we're going to work to put them together and invite others to come and help paint and just be in that space with us. So that's another element, is just kind of allowing my own practice to be one that involves more and more people as well.
And kind of taking what you learned from elders in like a village setting into a community that is relevant to you now.
Yeah, exactly. That's that of seeing
really beautiful.
Yeah, that's one family, and this is family too, and this is what I love to do with my family. So it makes sense, I guess.
That's so special. Ruha, we've unfortunately run out of time, but I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for making time for us today and sharing your own story and your own creative and spiritual journey, and how that has landed you into something that you love doing, that you're very passionate and good at. So I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure to have this opportunity to reflect.
Thanks so much for listening to Cloud 9. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Feel free to check out BahaiTeachings.org, where you can find more Baha'i-inspired podcasts, videos, and articles.